All right, I'm going to call the meeting of the Policy Committee to order. We'll start with introductions, but before we do that, I'm just going to note two changes in documents that were posted with the materials. One, the solicitation and registration and reporting. There is a red line version that we're going to just supply a paper copy to everyone. You'll have that by the time we get to that portion of it, and we'll walk through it. And then secondly, on the student representative and district student council policy, the version that was posted had a fragment of a sentence that was deleted, which was unintentional, and so we're having that fixed. And so, but by the time we get to that point in the meeting, it will be the correct version, and I think is what was intended. So with that, we'll start with introductions, and we'll just do the dais to start with, and then anybody in the audience who's presenting during the meeting, just introduce yourself when you get to the meeting. Kara, do you want to start?
Sure. Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Hi, Liz Large, Contracted Single Legal Advisor.
Julia Brim Edwards, Policy Committee Chair and Board Member.
Michelle DePass, Board Member.
Ian Rotorto, Student Rep-elect.
JJ Kunsevi, Student Representative.
Patty Sullivan, Board Member.
Great, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Do you have any public comment?
We do not.
Perfect. So we are going to start just changing the order as a courtesy to some staff who have to leave earlier, which is the compulsory enrollment age and grade level at entrance discussion. And it actually is just a next steps, and which is my intent to signal that I'm not going to be moving a change in the policy. I don't think I heard support from members of the board to change it, but I did want to talk about next steps because I still think the reason for the proposed change is a legitimate change. And the concern I raised at the beginning was that in a time in which our enrollment was dropping, we have students who are right on the cusp of the enrollment age on September 1st, and that my concern is that they were being told by the enrollment office, and our policy actually says that if you go to kindergarten somewhere else, even for a short period of time, and then apply to come back to PPS, that rule doesn't apply to you. And I was concerned about that for a number of reasons. One, if we're suggesting that somebody be homeschooled or enroll in a private school, in a couple of months they may not come back to PPS. So we've lost that student. The other concern was that in a time of, it's arbitrary. We talked about the arbitrariness. No matter what the date is, it's always going to be arbitrary. Is that PPS has declining enrollment. And so I still think even if we don't change the policy, some different approach, and I have some things I wanted to suggest just for discussion to see if the committee was interested. I'd also talked to the superintendent, who was indicated initially her flexibility in the initial date. And while that may not be the approach we want to take, I do think that we should look closely at the information that we got this last week on our capture rate, which is, I've never seen it so low at PPS. So our decline in enrollment is declining faster than the rate of the rest of the state. I think the rest of the state was 6%, and we're at a 10% enrollment drop since 2019. and our capture rate is down to, it's different at all the different grade levels, but in the 70s, which again, I've never seen it that low. One thing Portland has always prided itself in is having a very high capture rate. And of course, we know if we don't have students, well, public schools should be open and welcoming to everyone, but also it impacts the resources we get from the state. So I had a couple thoughts. So that is the lead-in, but a couple thoughts on next steps. And Emily, if you want to share your thoughts on this as well, I'd welcome them, but that we consider a couple things. One, if we don't want to change the date and we have families who contact us about early entry, having a much more robust engagement plan around getting them into one of our preschool programs. Because the theory is if somebody is in one of our preschool programs, that they're much more likely to continue into PPS. Second, the second thing would be like how that connects to the enrollment campaign that we're going to be engaging in this next year. And then third, you know, is there a change in the policy language which would be more inviting in the sense of if we have a hard date, you know, how we continue to invite families in versus them like, I'm just going somewhere else because it doesn't feel very welcoming, and the solutions that you're offering, which is wait till next year, or to go to preschool and actually there is no preschool, or to homeschool or go to private school aren't options. So those are just like some of the things that I thought as alternatives. And so I just open it up. And again, Emily, I would welcome your comments as well.
I think, you know, it's good ideas to connect and be welcoming, but I don't feel we need to solve our enrollment problem by putting kids in school too early. I think we have to be really careful about that. So that's my
today's
thought.
discussion was not to be a continuation of changing the policy. So I've already said that that's not going to happen. So I'm interested in like how we continue to welcome families, because I feel like our current policy is unwelcoming. I feel like the answers we've given to families are not real answers. And so I'm trying to figure out a way of like, if we're not going to change the date, which sounds like we're not going to, how do we want?
Yeah, and I
How can we
totally
do that?
agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you, because that sounds like an easier problem to solve than, you know, making an arbitrary kind of date. So yeah, I would love to hear what you have to say,
Yeah, and this is
what your thoughts are.
For sure. No, and I would say this is by no means just impacts my team, because my team is actually not where a lot of these inquiries come. Like, this is a larger conversation, and I think you're right, Director Brem Edwards, that it does, I think, connect to this larger conversation about the enrollment campaign, which I'm just learning about. I have my first meeting about that tomorrow, so more to come, and it's good that I have this framing in my head as I enter into that conversation. I appreciate the move away from changing the policy and toward ensuring that our practices align with the spirit of who we want to be, which is welcoming families into our schools, right? And that does feel like it aligns really well with the work we've been trying to do around kindergarten for the last many years, of sort of like, you don't have to be ready for kindergarten, we have to be ready for you, right? Like that feels in alignment with where we've been trying to go. And I think, you know, the Enrollment and Transfer Center, the early learning team, principals, secretaries, like there are lots of different people that have these conversations with families when families show up and say, can I register my child, right? And so we need to work on shared system practices and language around how we make sure that all those people who might get that inquiry know our policies, but also know our practices and our programs, know our pre-K programs, know what we offer, where we might have seats, what the enrollment process is, can sort of speak with families about their options community-wide, right? Like, I think that's all just on us to build up capacity, that all the folks who might receive these inquiries know how to answer them in a welcoming way that feels less like what I'm hearing you describe as sort of a door in your face and more like an opening door to, like, maybe not now, maybe not this way, but we absolutely want you in our system and we're going to find a way to help you, right? Is that what I'm hearing the want is?
And I also think it needs to be more than just words. Like, if we say, you should go to preschool, and you go pay for that, or you got to go find your own, to me I would want to see how actually, like, could we actually, every student who shows up, like, yeah, there is a preschool slot for you. And if there's not, I don't think we should be saying that then. Again, if we're saying our solution for if you want early entry is that there's a preschool slot, but we have to make sure that's actually accurate, because if it's like, oh, it's a preschool slot for these kids, then we should say we have preschool slots for these kids and you're going to have to find another place and we're going to welcome you next year. It's just, we can't, I don't think, give parents, say things inaccurately. And I'm not saying we have, but it's just like, it has to be real.
Yeah, for sure. And as we've shared with you guys, preschool now is it's a pretty nuanced space in PPS. So there is eligibility for any family potentially, and there's priority populations, and there's sites that get more full than other sites, and at any given point in the year a slot might be here, but a slot might not be here because kids move, things happen, right? So I think what we can commit to is making sure that our school secretaries, our principals, our counselors, right, people who might be the folks who get these inquiries, at least know who in our system knows the answers to those questions and could say, let me link you right up to my colleague who works on the early learners team and manages pre-K enrollment in our system. They'll be able to let you know if there's a slot available and if you qualify, which is a more transparent and honest answer than because the folks at our K-5 schools are never going to necessarily have that information, but they should know who does.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I care the most about is early childhood experiences, and of course, I want us to, demonstrate our values by being welcoming, for all comers. I didn't like the moving the date around at all. I did agree that it was an equity issue in that who has access to making special requests. And so it also seems like this coordination piece is easier to solve. And so, are you, and I myself don't understand where the kind of preschool for all priority populations fit in with everybody else and where these openings are, but that seems, I mean, if that could be worked on, that coordination piece between someone maybe from Multnomah County Preschool for All, or who's ever coordinating
we do our own enrollment, and so we have an enrollment team on our early learners team. Director Sullivan knows this. She came out and visited us and learned a little bit more. So we have folks that are
Director
PPS
Sullivan.
employees that have this information. They run the enrollment. They have all the most recent numbers. They understand it. So it really is just a coordination piece and making sure that all 58 of our school secretaries who are in K-5 buildings have that number on their desk and know how to connect people if this question comes up. And we can absolutely commit to doing better with that connecting of dots within our system. Excellent.
And is there, are there spots open for students that come from all schools, or is that still, is there still a need there in terms of the demand for kindergarten spots? Is the demand for kindergarten spots, are we able to fulfill the demand?
For kindergarten or pre-K?
Well, for both, I guess, pre-K.
And we have no cap on kindergarten, right? We can always fulfill the demand for kindergarten. We have 910 PPS pre-K seats right now across the district. They are not neighborhood bound. So you just have to live in Portland and or actually even in Multnomah County for preschool for all slots.
Okay.
And so you don't, and you get to prefer as a family the location where there's availability that's best for you. And then there's sort of some formulas that are run through to say, you know, if you're priority population. That said, like later in the school year, if there's an open seat and, you know, like our preschool for all slots don't have a hard income eligibility cap.
Okay.
So
was
if
curious
we
about
have
that, too.
filled our priority seats with priority populations and there's not a waiting list, there is a reality in which someone who's not indicated in a priority population could qualify for a preschool for all slot.
Okay.
And that's why this is nuanced and why we would want our enrollment team answering these questions, because they're the
Right.
folks that have all that nuanced information and at any given point in the year would be able to answer the question about where there's availability and not, and for whom. And they also know where else there's pre-K available in our community, because we're not the only preschool for all provider in Multnomah County or even in Portland boundaries. So the answer may be right now in PPS buildings or in the part of the city that you want to be in, there's not a space available, but our partner, you know, who X, Y, and Z preschool for all provider may have spaces. So let me connect you with those folks. They also are in our community.
Excellent. And is there a system like web-based, or is it paper system still that so everybody has access to real-time?
Enrollment information?
Mm-hmm. Could
It's
that be
not
developed?
public within our system like that. Preschool for all, in most cases, the county manages enrollment for preschool for all seats. They don't for us because of our size and scale and braided model. We
Okay.
do that ourselves, but so in most cases, it would mean going back to the county and applying through them for sort of those more at-large preschool for all seats. And they do have more of a database that I have to look and see. I'm not sure how public it is in terms of like whether you can actually see real time where their slots.
Like a dashboard?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm strongly in agreement with strengthening our engagement and communication plan when it comes to pre-K. Just for clarity, would kind of that communication plan on how we communicate to our families, would that be in the policy or in the AD?
It wouldn't be in policy.
I mean, we have, so again, all these things kind of intersect, right? We do have pre-K/Head Start policy around our enrollment procedures that you as the board of our Head Start program do approve and see. So there is that, there is policy. And we do have a whole outreach coordinated plan that we'd be happy to tell you more about. Most of this, I think, is just procedure and or AD level work. We don't have an AD specifically around this yet, to my knowledge.
Yeah. And how many pre-K sites do we currently have here in PPS?
Right now, we have PPS pre-K slots at 14 different sites, and that's those 910 seats across 14 different sites. Some of them are like K-5 schools with embedded pre-K classrooms there. Some of them are kind of standalone pre-K centers. And then we have pre-K providers within our boundaries that also offer pre-K that are not PPS run, sometimes even within our buildings. So, for example, at Vestal, which I know is your alma mater, JJ, we have two community-run preschool for all classrooms at Vestal that are not run by PPS. We've given that community organization space to run their program in our building. And so that is beyond our 910 seats, but it is within our parameters. And that's the kind of thing where our team could say, we don't have space, but you're interested in this neighborhood. And there's another provider that we partner with in that space and could help make those links.
And are families allowed to apply at any time of the year? Is there like some certain date or?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I look forward to hearing more about the enrollment campaign.
Yeah, me too. So I think we can work on these things very much, Director Berm-Edwards, on making sure that if a family comes to us and say, my child is going to miss the September 1 cutoff, I really wanted them to start kindergarten this year, we can work on across all our offices the talking points that anyone should be able to use to say, like, we want you in our system, let us help you find a bridge.
Yeah, I guess one thing we'd be concerned about is like that we be defaulting again to like an informal system, because so I have a request. I'd like to see the 14 sites and which ones are preschool for all and which ones are Head Start.
They're all braided.
Okay, so I'd just like the map for them all, because I'll just say my understanding from the county is like thousands of people who apply for seats don't get them. So I'm concerned if it's like, we're gonna give information to the school secretary and then they're gonna, like, it's gonna sound good, and then ultimately for a lot of people, like, there won't be a site, they're not eligible. And I mean, it's interesting because, like, for example, the county took off there's waiting criteria, like, not, way more people apply than get actually seats, and there's waiting criteria, but they took like the waiting criteria off the website. And then there's like, I don't think there's maybe like a handful on the west side, and we know there's kids that qualify even for Head Start or Preschool for All. So I think being like very transparent for like, hey, if it's not going to happen, then here's a list of private preschools. I mean, having some certainty is better than believing that you might be eligible and being told you might be eligible and that that's an option, and then never having that as an option. So it seems like we just, part of it is like giving people information so they can make decisions, because we can still be like, the likelihood of you qualifying is quite low.
I agree with you. I don't think we want to give folks false hope. That's why I think what I'm imagining is sort of like a script or talking points. And again, we get very few of these inquiries every year. We're talking about this very small slice of families whose child turns 5 right after September 1st, and they want their child to start kindergarten at that time. And I think we maybe had like literally a handful, 5 inquiries this year of families that fell into that bucket. But we don't know where the family's going to inquire. Are they going to come to me? Are they going to go to a principal? Are they going to go to a secretary? Are they going to go to Judy Brennan's office, right? So I think if we had a set of talking points for this very small subset of families that all those folks could have on their desks, that kind of could walk them through, we're sorry, this is our policy, here are options, let me kind of talk you through, let me put you in touch with the right people, that's a more authentic response than don't worry about it, we can get you into pre-K, right? Because we know that's not always going to be the case.
Well, I also think for more than just the September students, because there's a lot of private schools also now have pre-K programs. So like it's very convenient and easy for a family. Like, I'm in the pre-K program, they just keep going, or the older sibling got in, they just keep going. And so like, this is more of like a general, like, we should be looking at ways in which we're showing the path from preschool. Like I said, I was really shocked last week about our capture rate numbers, because that shows that a lot of, like, we're just losing lots of a third of our families.
If I may, do we have someone at the district level who this can be routed through centrally? So, because talking points are good, but I definitely agree with you that relying on an informal system is unreliable.
Would be Emily and her team.
We have a very robust and established system for pre-K enrollment.
Great.
That's not it. We have a whole team of many, we've presented to you guys. We have a whole large enrollment team that handles all of our pre-K enrollment. There's a whole system, it's web-based, there's a formula, they do tons of outreach, they do community outreach all over. So I think I just want to separate those conversations, because I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation with the impression that there's not a formal system around pre-K outreach and enrollment. There is. This conversation has been about this very small slice of families who just miss the kindergarten cutoff and are looking for alternatives. And so they either want to come to kindergarten early, or they want to know what else they can do. So that's the space. And we only know about them if they come to us, right? That we only know about them if they inquire and say, oh, I missed the deadline, right? So that's where this kind of informal thing comes in, because we don't know whose door they're going to knock on. We don't know who they're going to ask that question to, because they're not already enrolled in our system.
If they come to us, would it not just be best to have, again, we can have some talking points, but just be like, if they come to the principal, be like, hey, here's the basics, but who you should talk to is,
Yeah, I think that is what often has happened. What I think is actually more welcoming is if somebody because hopefully our hope would be that right a year from now, the family's going to come back to that school and enroll in that school. And so if they can build a relationship with the people in that school versus me who works here, I actually think that's probably more welcoming. And so if they were like, oh, this secretary, this principal, this counselor, like really helped me. I didn't get the answer I wanted, but they really helped me, and I want to come back and be a part of this community next year. I actually think that's probably a better system for us to develop. And I think it exists informally now. I think I'm hearing you ask for us to like formalize this and codify this a little bit for this outlier space.
Well, outlier, but I also just think PPS better take seriously that we're losing a third
Yeah.
of our students.
Yeah, no, we
I
do.
mean-
I do. I mean,
I
and
want to
again,
say
that's-
something about this too. It is a community-wide problem that
Yeah.
we have,
Yeah.
we under-resourced preschools for years and years. But what's really interesting is that we're having this, high demand for preschools and not really a way to serve everyone that needs a preschool spot, and yet a lot of community input around, the declining birth rate. So both things are happening at the same time. It sounds like we need to figure out, this 5 people or the 5 inquiries, a way to keep them connected to their neighborhood school in concert with the activities that we'll be undertaking to get some of those families back.
Yeah. And I think we do take this very seriously. And again, it is community-wide, it is district-wide too. Like we are all
It's a
taking
community
enrollment very
problem.
seriously. And I think that's why we're entering this campaign and why that's many departments coming together to say, how are we going to solve this problem? We are actually not really having a major problem with pre-K enrollment at this point. Like we are getting families into pre-K and filling those slots. We are needing to boost up kindergarten enrollment and beyond, right? We see drop points all through K-12. I unfortunately have to go to an appointment with my child. I have to get out of here in the next couple of minutes. Speaking of that, do you have one more? You look
No,
at, yeah.
So I'd appreciate if you could come back with nothing, it can be high level, but I really think we shouldn't be telling people you can just go to preschool, like there's plenty of preschool options when it's like not a thing,
Yeah.
or we don't actually have a system, because then we get into, again, just a verbal, like, well, somebody told me this, and that wasn't actually accurate. And I also think it's more than just those September students, because frankly, there's just, how many kindergartners are there in PPS?
I think right now, I just looked this up recently, I think we have 2,900 right now.
So that's a lot more than 900
Yes,
pre-K
correct.
slots.
Correct.
So that tells me then, like, we have like a third of them.
Yeah.
Does that sound doable?
To come back.
Or just share back with us, like, what you think is something at least that's in writing versus like informally? Because our policy basically says.
Yeah, I think
Says-
I want to understand, are we talking about for the kids who miss the cutoff and the families that inquire, or are we talking about the larger enrollment campaign to try to boost kindergarten enrollment? I know they're connected, but they are also like different bodies of work, right? And different scales in terms of like my answer of what I can get
Okay.
back to you.
I was trying to broaden it because people had like, it's not just about these kids. And
Yeah.
then when I saw the other piece, it's like, we have a way bigger problem than just the kids in September that we say, don't come here.
Okay. So I can commit to something around the inquiries that come in around people wanting early entrance to kindergarten. I can commit to participating in the enrollment campaign work. I'm not leading that. I don't know the timeline on that yet. I do assume there will be regular updates coming back to you through Dr. Armstrong, because that is
Who is leading
a
that?
priority right now. Good question. I believe Dr. Franco.
Okay.
Again,
well,
I'm
we'll take
on the
whatever-
learning edge of that,
I'll take
so-
whatever you have, but I guess I want
Yeah.
to just be clear that I'm not, so thank you, and I know you need to go. Great, I'll take the, just this narrow piece, but I think there's a larger conversation,
Yeah.
and I think people can say all they want, we don't want an arbitrary date, but we better get after that, the district better get after that larger piece of work, because
Yeah. And I will take this conversation, but I am literally going to my first meeting on that tomorrow, so I can take this into that and share what we spoke about.
Thank you. That
Great.
was
Yeah.
helpful.
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
guys.
appreciate it.
Julia, I have a question about when you talked about the capture rate. That's the capture of the number of kindergarten age students in Portland
Yeah.
that are coming to PPS schools.
And if you look at the answers we got to the board budget questions, I asked a question on the capture rate, and it's in the 70s, and usually it was over 80.
And that means the 70% of that age student that live here.
Are attending PPS.
Yeah.
And-
That's, yeah.
and
They're
like
attending their neighborhood or some other school, right?
They're going to Portland Public Schools.
Okay.
And if you look at most of the urban districts around the country, most of them have very low capture rates. I mean, Seattle's has always been way lower than Portland's. And it's always been a kind of point of pride. Like, we're a district that is that is a public school system that serves the vast majority of kids in our district. Because districts do change when they have different capture rates. Because, I mean, I'll just say, like, when you have something for example, something on the ballot, like people who are like invested in, like, I've got my kids in public schools, like this is like my grandkids are in public schools or my neighbor kids are in public schools, but it's like, they all go somewhere else.
So
and
we,
like,
we don't know whether they're going somewhere else or they're just not going. We don't really know where they're all going.
And I think they're
Is that
going
right?
I think they're going other places. I think what we don't hear a lot about are the demographic shifts that have happened in the city, though. Broader, Portland used to be more of a working class, especially in its inner city neighborhoods. Income levels have risen in every inner city neighborhood over the last 20 years. And there are also more programs available. So what I'm saying is people that have traditionally in our, Brooklyn, Irvington, Laurelhurst, our inner city or close in neighborhoods, the incomes have risen, the choices are greater. Families have more choice. And we've also doubled in population since, we were children. So we've got people coming in from all over. And I think it's an important number to follow. 70% is really low.
So I don't think it's less about income, but less about, like, our schools were closed for almost 2 years during COVID. And
Yeah,
a lot of
it is about income as well.
private schools weren't. And then we had,
That's true.
a month without school during the work stoppage, that a lot of parents I talked to with young kids were like, I can't do that, either because they had to work or because, like, their student just couldn't afford to miss school. I think, to me, it's like a sound the alarm moment, because that's the first time I've seen us below 80%. And like I say, it impacts, I think, just like general community support for our schools, and also the amount of resources we have. So anyway, if anybody has anything else they are interested in on Emily's Narrow Slice, they can send me an email. I'll also ask Dr. Armstrong for just a larger, well, I already asked for it during the budget process, so we can look at the larger budget piece, but I don't view it as just that one segment. I look at, and I guess this is for next year for anybody in the policy committee, is like, we have a policy that basically suggests, like, you can be homeschooled or go to a private school and then come back in at 4, and it's like, without other language around that, which is concerning.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and we'll work to make the language more inclusive and welcoming for all people that are interested in attending PPS.
Okay, our next item is the solicitation, registration, and reporting. And I asked Liz to walk through this. And we also have Emily Courtledge here, who is the sort of expert on all things contracting. And I must have passed down the whole packet because I don't have my red line anymore. Is there an extra one? So we've had this before us several times, and based on feedback, we have another draft. And I say we also have our contract expert here, so.
So I'll walk through the red line version dated April 18, 25. Karis also posted it. It doesn't make too many substantive changes. It's a cleanup and reordering of the February 26th version that was in the materials and before the committee earlier, but also fleshes out some additional details. So the first section, the purpose section, is really just to talk about the commitment to integrity and transparency in public contracting, acknowledging that there's a lot of contracting work that happens at the district that involves decision-making, depending on the contract, by high-level staff or board members. It defines the contracts that are subject to this policy in a bracketed amount. This kind of $100,000 placeholder has been there since the beginning, and we've just left it in brackets. And describes expenses, contracts, or other economic interests that are expected to exceed $100,000 with a particular vendor or source in a fiscal year. It does not include contracts that are already subject to a competitive bidding process. The thinking being that those are already in a public process where people have visibility and transparency. Those include traditional RFPs, invitations to bid, competitive quotes, and potential informal RFPs also. Those are competitive processes. The informal RFPs are not as public, which is why those are in brackets for discussion. And then also collective bargaining agreements. There's a definition of engagement with, so this covers the engagement of staff or board members with vendors for these eligible contracts. It's a pretty straightforward, common sense definition of engagement, whether it's by email, in-person meetings, or other outreach. So the guts of the policy are triggers a registration requirement when someone who has an eligible contract or expenditure engages with district staff or board members. Then they must register with the district when that engagement totals more than 5 hours bracketed per calendar quarter. So it's trying to make sure that there are a de minimis encounter or conversation doesn't trigger an administrative requirement, but that there's some, but if there's enough volume, that's where the transparency is needed. The mechanism for transparency is a public registration process on the website. It requires the name of the individual, the general nature of the contract or expenditure, and that registration is to be maintained on the website by the vendor for at least 90 days after the final engagement on the eligible contract or expenditure. There are exceptions to what's an eligible contract, and then there's an exception, a broader exception category under this policy, which is making sure people understand this doesn't apply to general advocacy for things that may have monetary value, but that aren't an individual economic interest. So when parents and school communities come to advocate, that would not be implicated. And also just general marketing communications as well, again, trying to get to the meat. Certainly this sits in addition to and not in lieu of any other district policies, and state statutes and ethics rules apply. I probably should have started with just to remind anyone who's watching at home, this started with a request for something that looks kind of like the Metro policy. So staff built on that framework, and that's sort of the origins of some of the component parts to it. And Director Brummer, since you're the one who asked for it, maybe you may have some other context for it as well. But
no, I think thank you for walking us through the general provisions. I had a couple quick questions for Emily, but I want to let other members ask questions first.
I guess my question is just, this is just so people don't come and kind of try to get things through without public knowledge, is the main reason for it.
It's to have transparency in who's attempting to influence is in the shortest. It's not illegal to lobby at all, or to try and get a contract. As a $2 billion enterprise, we have a lot of potential resources that people would want to attempt to influence. And I know, Emily, when you said, I get lots of solicitations and I just delete them, I think that's your practice. It's not always a practice, and sometimes you don't even know somebody. That's a pretty direct way of somebody trying to influence it, versus like, hey, I'm going to take you out to lunch and talk to you about my new curriculum or this app that I think the district should really use, or there's a whole host of ways in which people would attempt to influence. Obviously, it's not to send something to you.
Right.
You want to introduce yourself and
Hi.
maybe explain what you do?
Sure. I'm Emily Courtnidge, Director of Purchasing and Contracting Department here. So we facilitate all of the district's purchases, contracts, and competitive solicitations for goods and services.
And you've been here
11 and a half years.
And you have a helper with you today?
Yes, well, my middle daughter is my ride home today, so.
Exciting.
Did you have a question, Patty?
No, I mean, we get emails all the time saying, do you want to have this great program that's going to make your children all brilliant? And I usually just delete them. Sometimes I'll show them to the superintendent and say, have you heard of this? And I figure most of the departments have heard of them. They're not going to hear about it from us. So I don't know. I just wonder how it would work. Somebody would have something they thought was a good thing for Portland Public Schools, and they would just come to you and say, I would like to share this with people.
So
that-
usually they do not come, well, they may come straight to me or one of my staff because they see that we're the purchasing department. But what they don't realize is we don't make any of the purchasing
Yeah.
decisions for the district. Those are all decentralized, with each department and school making its own decision about the purchases within their budgets and areas of expertise. So when people come to me trying to sell me something for the school district, that's why I delete and ignore. I have, I'm not the one making decisions about what kind of cups we buy or any of that. So I don't have a lot of visibility into vendors approaching other departments and schools directly. But if they're trying to make a case for a contract, then that's where I think this would come into play. And the vendor would, as I understand it, have an obligation, if they meet all these requirements, to register on a website that would need to be created.
So for instance, if I got an email from a program that was going to help our math scores, I could send that email to staff, curriculum staff. And if they thought that was good, they could tell that vendor to register.
They could.
Or could they just talk for a short period of time and say, no, I don't think that's good, or yes, I think that's good? Or I just don't
Yeah.
want to make it so complicated for a simple ask.
Sure.
Except for, I'll just say, like, these people are paid. Their job is to often influence a decision. I mean, I'll give you
Yeah.
the examples if you're trying to think. Just take the Yonder lobbyist
Oh.
who was like contacting. It's like, attempting to like, here's the solution I want the district to adopt. That was one. This happened early in like 2017 or 18. I forget if it was like OSBA or NSBA, but a bus driver, a bus company, like hosted a dinner for school board members to share like their services they offer to school board members. which is, like, we'd like your contract. I'm not going to name the company. Tech companies often contact board members directly. I know they also contact staff. If you go to any of the national conferences, all the curriculum providers are all over the place, like selling to decision makers. I mean, you just look at all the vendor booths and.
So if you thought something sounded really fantastic, you could say, oh, you can register with whatever we decide you register with, and then you can share your information. Is that the way it would work?
Yeah. It's a transparency thing. Again, there's nothing illegal about it. You have to follow the ethics rules that are in play for the state, obviously. So, like, if a company was going to take board members out to dinner and tell them, like, why their bus service is the bus service the district should contract with, it has to be under $50, follow a bunch of rules. It has to be, so most of the people on the other side are very used to, if they deal with large public entities, this is a thing anyway.
So we would just send them to the, wherever you would register.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a conversation. It's like, also, if you're, if you call me for the second time, like, you probably should know that we have a registration system, and there's probably something that could be put on this is more of an implementation that you could put on the contracting website. Like, we have this rule, and again.
Yeah,
I
I've
think
wondered about because we do get a lot of marketing and selling material, and I've wondered if they realize that board members don't make purchasing decisions, and how we would, because you can't respond to all of them, how we would direct them to a vendor. It's a vendor registration, but it's a lobbying requirement. The city of Portland, before they issue a check to anybody that does business with the city of Portland, you have to register as a vendor. There's a separate process for registering as a lobbyist.
Right, so we do approve our vendors before we can ever pay a vendor. We do have vendors who come to us and ask, hey, can I get on your approved vendor list? We don't have an approved vendor list. So we don't want to just set up all of our vendors in our ERP system. I mean, we don't want to set up all interested potential vendors. We want to set up those vendors who we're actually going to do business with and are needing to pay pursuant to a contract or otherwise. So this would be very different. And my concern would be, we wouldn't want to give vendors the impression that because they registered on this list that somebody's going to reach out to them, or that they're going to get any business, or that it's that kind of thing at all.
So we would just tell them that. Yeah.
This is a potential policy ad, but more just provide clarity for people who don't live in the contracting world.
Sure.
Would it be easy to do like a 2-sentence, a 1 to 3 sentence description of like the RFP? I know the contracting manual is like 190 something pages, or the policy, but I'm wondering each of these ones, because they all mean something slightly different.
Yep. Could we cross-reference it? Sorry, I can't speak today. Cross-reference them to, like, hyperlink to the contracting rule itself?
Yes.
Question?
Someone was a big fan of having also them in the policy. Is that?
Are you asking me right here to give a brief description of each of these?
Actually, it's a 2-part question.
Okay.
I'm going to have a question about the actual description. But sometimes in our policies, we have like a definition section.
Mm.
And I think people could be like, I don't know if I fall into this exemption of what these 4 categories are.
I mean, I think that people who are used to doing business with public agencies will probably understand these 4 categories. but I suppose we could reference the public contracting rules or actually underlying Oregon statute, which might be easier for people to reference.
That totally works as long as it's in layperson language. Actually, though, I think the two that probably have the fuzziest area, and I'm not sure that I'm okay with them being exceptions, is competitive quotes. It's in a lowercase, which is that a PBS thing or a
It's
ORS thing?
It's ORS. So your requests for proposals and then invitations to bid, which are more for goods and construction, which is a low bid based award. Those are formal procurements that are publicly advertised per Oregon law. And different kinds of purchases or services require a formal solicitation at different dollar thresholds. Below that, you have this intermediate category. So for an invitation to bid, it's a quote process. It's an informal quote process. For an RFP, it's an informal RFP process. And what makes it informal is that it's not publicly advertised. We just have to reach out to 3, or in some cases 5, minimally 3 to 5 interested parties or parties who provide the service that we're looking to solicit or the goods that we're looking to purchase. So it's not publicly advertised, but we reach out to 3 to 5. They send us their proposals, their bids, go through the same process of determining the lowest bid, lowest quote, or best quality proposal, and award on that basis. And then below the dollar thresholds for those informal are the direct award. And again, those thresholds vary according to every different kind of purchase, so professional services, goods and services, construction, architecture, engineering, and related services. So they're competitive processes, but they're not publicly advertised.
The competitive quotes and the informal RFPs.
Exactly.
What about we want a service and it's $50,000 and we know a vendor that we've worked with that we're just going to work with again?
That's where my team comes in and says no, unless there's an applicable exception in our rules. But say the service is lawn mowing, that falls under Division 47 goods and services. The direct award threshold for those services is $25,000, above which between $25,000 and $250,000 you need to do a 3-quote process. So we would tell that department you need to reach out to 3 potential lawnmowers at minimum and get bids, and then we'll look at those. They submit their bid tabs to us with the contracts, and we review that at that time for compliance.
So, okay, take the lawnmower situation. So, suppose there's somebody who really wants to get in to Portland Public Schools lawnmower plan, and they're not in. And so is that kind of, they would register as
If they were interested in doing business with us, they would probably reach out to our maintenance department
okay.
and make the case for why they should provide services. And then perhaps next time our maintenance department is looking for a lawnmower, they would include this firm in their 3 to 5 that they reach out to for bids.
And then would that be considered in this, that they should go through this process to reach out?
Well, it depends which of this amended language you include, but right now we have some language sort of excluding those folks if their 5 hours or more engagement is primarily because we reached out to them. So just because they reached out to us initially, as I understand it reading this, as long as it's not more than 5 hours, they wouldn't need to register.
Oh, okay.
And then once we've reached out to them as part of a competitive process, then they're kind of exempt to the extent they're back and forth with us as part of that competitive process that we initiated.
Okay, so it doesn't stop people from saying, I'm interested in working with you.
Right.
Okay.
And I should mention that we have a lot of minority contractors, small minority and women-owned businesses who we actively seek to engage with and encourage them to come to us and kind of solicit work with us. I wouldn't say that I'm aware of any that are, engaged for 5 hours, but I know that, for example, our minority business manager in Office of School Modernization brings in some small business vendors to present to our facilities and modernization folks to make their case. So I wouldn't want them necessarily to get caught up in this because we are inviting them to sort of, make their case of why they should be part of this pool of the next people we quote to, for example.
Yeah, and I know you shared that board members can simply just direct them to someone in staff. And I was just wondering, does that mean board members or student representatives aren't allowed to have a conversation with the vendor?
Yes, you are allowed. The one caution I would say is if we are embarking on a competitive process, that's when I ask staff to not, if we've started an RFP process, it's not appropriate for staff at that time to then be talking to a potential proposer outside of that process. At that point, all communication should funnel through my department, and then we work with the, issuing department or school to answer questions and make sure everybody has the same information. So we want to really prevent any kind of appearance of bias at that point because we have the strict process of evaluation with evaluators who are chosen. So that's when I would say that we should cut off communication if they're going to be part of a competitive process.
And can you share a little bit more of what that competitive process would look like?
Sure. So for a request for proposals, we put out a publicly advertised solicitation. It's a very long document that describes in detail what we're looking for. It can go on for pages in terms of the scope, depending on what kind of service we're looking for. We describe the length of the intended contract. And we describe the evaluation criteria and the points that will be awarded for each evaluation category. And we describe in detail how the solicitation is run and all the deadlines. Interested proposers have a deadline by which they must submit a proposal. They do this all electronically through an electronic bidding platform. Once those proposals are come in, there's an evaluation committee selected. My team we are not evaluators, but we run the evaluation process to make sure it's strictly in compliance with law. We add up all the points, convert them to ranks, and we come up with an awarded vendor and make a recommendation to the department. This is the highest scoring proposer. In some categories, like just basic goods and construction, it's a pure low bid situation. So we issue an invitation to bid. The scope spells out all the details of what we're trying to construct or what we need, including architectural drawings, etc. And then all that is submitted back to us is a bid, so an actual dollar amount, and the lowest bid wins as long as they're otherwise qualified. So those are the formal processes, and the informal processes are similar, but they're not publicly advertised, so there's a little more flexibility there.
I have 3 categories that I'm interested where they'd fall. Curriculum, like what in your categories, whether they fall in any of these exemptions. Curriculum, bus contracts and like marketing firms or communication firms.
So easiest first, bus contracts for the purchase of buses. That would be
Not like the actual buses, but like the
Oh.
drivers, like
drivers, sorry.
for student.
Sure, that was via a very complex request for proposals.
So that'd be an RFP. What about
Formal,
right.
absolutely.
What about curriculum?
Curriculum is usually exempted under the board adopted rules, which includes some exemptions. So there's an exemption for copyrighted materials and creative works available from only one source. And most curriculum falls under that exemption. And I'll just note on the side that a lot of our curriculum goes through a very complex adoption process that's almost like an RFP, but maybe more complex.
And what about like professional services like communications or marketing?
So those are subject to the personal services contracting rules. So direct select is up to $75,000, 75 to 250 is informal RFP, and above that is formal. There are some direct negotiation rules for things like legal services, for services identified in a student's IEP. There's a bunch of exemptions also for kinds of services that really rely on long-term relationships and are not really easily subject to a competitive process and getting a new one every 3 years. That can include auditing services, legal services, as we've said, and some others.
So I'm not sure I would agree to, I'm speaking to myself, not to you, just out there, but like, I'm not sure I think that we should exempt all these groups. Again, it's not you can't do it, you just making it transparent, because when I go to any large educational conference or a lot of the outreach, definitely people are trying to influence like those 3 categories I shared. And again, this isn't about like lobbying or attempting to influence is bad, because a lot of times it's like, I'm just sharing why my product is great and why you should check it out. Like, you may not be familiar with it. I mean, I've heard every pitch there is. Right, like exactly. And so, again, it's not like you can't engage in the process or there's something wrong with it. It just should be transparent. But like the curriculum people, even though it's complicated, it's like what we buy. I mean, we spent $70 million on curriculum from the last bond, or more than that. And it's like, why did we spend so much? Because other districts didn't. It's like, well, we built out this whole thing. It's like, do we need all that? So I'm interested in what others think. To me, it's like just being transparent about who's attempting to do business with the district and engaging in conversations that may not be public. Obviously, when we vote on a contract, it's very public. But that's maybe after all the influencing has happened. So I'm just curious what other...
I think this is a good start. I'm really interested in also, increasing transparency where we can, but my understanding is that ORS 244, whatever, already includes all of the rules and regs, what's formal, what's informal, what's a personal services versus a professional. And so, like, the conversations already happened at the state level, and publicly funded, organizations, cities, school districts are bound to those statutes.
Yes.
Are you talking about the ethics statute?
No, I'm talking about the purchasing procurement. But this is talking about registering people if they have an interest over a certain dollar amount that we don't have, and that's to create more transparency? Yeah, I think more transparency is great. If it's not built into our procurement code, I mean, this is just registering, saying, right? That's all it is.
Right.
It's daylighting the fact that someone wants to do business with us. That would be over the threshold, whatever the dollar figure is. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean the person who wants the contract for the lawn mowing has to do this. They just come right to you. This is,
more lobbying, not necessarily vendor, so it's a little bit different.
yeah, I'm
It's
just,
called the lobbying registration. I mean, I think the goal is, what we're trying to solve for is large contracts being let. The lobbying that happens, or mid-size, is what we're trying to solve, this opacity issue. We want to know who's coming at us for contracts, who's inquiring.
Public knowing, like, who is, we have a lot of resources that, a lot of resources that get contracted out, or we have to make a lot of expenditures that there's not obviously our biggest ones, which are with our employees, are public. So it's the category of things that are non-people services, right?
And Director
no.
DePass, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would note we've tinkered with the title because it at one point said solicitation, but that's actually a procurement term. And
Yes.
so it was confusing that way.
Mhm.
It's now back to lobbying, which I think is what the Metro, don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what the Metro policy says. It is a vendor facing, it's not limited to vendor interests. If there are other economic interests, they would be implicated, but it's largely going to be vendors.
I mean, this is so baked into a lot of entities who sell services to public entities. Like, if you go down to the state and you are looking for an expenditure, like, and you're not doing it because you're a volunteer, you register and you actually do a fair amount of reporting. So this is actually a pretty light transparency.
yeah, and I'm just trying to think of, give me an example.
I would just say, what do you mean? An example?
I mean, you've given me the example of the yonder pouches. Can you think of anything else?
Curriculum, a bus contract. If you go to any of the national conferences, everybody's selling a service. Turf fields, like, there's different turf companies that do the installations. I mean,
But don't you have people you go out to for that already?
Yes, those
Yeah.
would be subject to a competitive process.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, do we need to, beyond what we already do, which we meet a threshold and we meet accountability standard, do we need this? I mean, if we've already got, so we already see the expenditure contracts and amendments. Obviously, all of the people that we're doing business with have already, they're transparent because they're in our materials. So does this, I'm trying to figure out how this would operate.
okay,
I'm just curious.
but that's like after all the influencing is done. If there was, I mean, in theory, this is,
Is this to get ahead of the influencing?
well, no, this is to, like, because we're a public entity, obviously private entities can do whatever they want. But if you're working with a public entity and you're attempting to influence, it gives the public, I think, information about, like, who is competing, who is competing or who is attempting to influence the process. And I say, this is, like, I would say that meets, like, the minimum standards of transparency versus, there's a lot more robust regimes you could have, even in, like, the state has contracting policies, and yet there's hundreds of people who are registered lobbyists, because even though there's a state contracting process, there's a lot of money that goes out the door in other ways.
So the people that we already work with, should they be considered lobbyists too? Because they're,
Well, if they spend more than 5 hours in a quarter attempting to
but they're already
get
in.
business.
Who knows what they did before? I don't know. I'm finding it difficult to see.
I'll just say, this is the
who we're
world, this is the
protecting.
world I've lived in for 35 years.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, if anybody thinks this is needed, they should go to a Council of Great Cities School Conference, they should go to a OSBA, they should go to COSA. Those vendors aren't there just because they don't have anything else to do on that week.
And we don't already have a way to.
I've also
I'm not
been on
sure.
the other side, I've
There's
also
so
been on
many
the other
people-
side, so I'll just.
Yeah, there's so many people that already work with us, right? Do they need to register? Because
Well, if they're
after all, at
interested
some
in
point
having
they-
ongoing contracts with the.
But let's look at the
school district.
language, because I think it's a really good question. We touched on it last time.
yeah,
It's engaging for the purpose of obtaining an eligible contract. And so if someone is performing services that in the course of fulfilling an existing contract,
I think it should say obtaining or extending, just because.
they may be, I'm not trying to parse words, we're gonna get these questions from people. We're gonna get these questions from law firms. Is the act of performing those services before any extension is on the table for the purpose of obtaining? And it's not, I don't wanna pick on the lawyers, cause I am one with a law firm, so let's put that all out there, but but other personal services providers that are exempt from direct competition, I think the board needs to be clear about whether that is, there's a direct conversation. Is doing good work under an existing contract for the purpose of obtaining another one? Or is that just fulfilling the existing contract? And I think that's a decision for you all to make.
So here a question I have, I'm gonna answer your question in just a moment, but the question of like obtaining, would that be obtaining an amendment? Would that be obtaining?
That would be obtaining.
Okay. So servicing a contract, I wouldn't view as that, versus reaching out, it's like, hey, our contract is expiring, and we'd like to come in and talk to you about like our new rates, or,
Gotcha. That's a helpful distinction. We might be able to add a clarifying sentence there.
what do you all think? To me, it's like, that's very different from like, I'm providing the services under the contract that I currently have versus, hey, our contract is up and we want to come, we've loved our relationship with PPS and feel like we really like provided services to students or staff, and we'd like to talk to you about extending it, but we've actually changed our rates because of the tariffs, and we don't have any competitors anymore and we can raise our rates. That seems like, to me, that would be the other category.
and so that would mean they would then register.
If they're engaging in a sufficient volume of conversation about the new contract and pitching their work as opposed to performing, I think is the distinction.
It's really interesting. I'm curious if this, unintended consequences is having a chilling effect on business. And also, I just attended a policy institute where they said, all of your policy, you should ask, how does this help students? Or does it help students?
Well, here's what I would say.
And also, so business always happens like on the golf course and, at the dinner table. It's a little bit different for business than it is for a publicly funded agency, but I'm just curious if an unintended consequence would be that there would be a chilling effect on business? Or what do you think the outcome of this policy, if people,
Yeah,
let's
I'd
say, I
love to
want to
make
do
that
business,
pitch,
I
'cause-
want to sell a large amount of curriculum, 70 million, to the school district, and I want to take the superintendent out to dinner.
I have pictures. I mean, it happens. And I just think it should be out on the table. And I say this, I spent 17 years in a private entity that did lots of work with public entities, and the public deserves the right to know what's happening. So there's an ethics set of guidelines, but also I think transparency about who is trying to, like all of our technology, that's a very competitive space. I think to answer your question of like, what's the benefits to students? I think a school district or any public entity that has the public feels they can trust what's happening and that the work is transparent and how public dollars are spent is transparent, I think ultimately benefits students, because when there's a lack of trust, it hurts students. Like, you're just like less effective.
I just have a quick question, because I feel like this entire conversation also revolves around how difficult is this process to register?
Yeah, there's because most other large public agencies already have it. I think there's plenty of models, so it shouldn't be onerous. I mean, frankly, the state one, it's all online, and it's just you just go in and fill out the template, and it's pretty easy.
Yeah, because this is just like, this policy is just pertaining to like when people would have to register, but doesn't really go into that process, which I think is also it ties very directly into a lot of the conversations we're having about, will this have a chilling effect on business? Like, if this is a very hard process, then it could, but
Yeah, because I'm pretty familiar with all over the United States. I did compliance with things, lobbying registrations in municipalities, and this is a very, very light touch. And frankly, I think that's fine to start with, because it may be like, that's all we need, or the district actually needs something more robust. The time you don't want to be, actually Metro has theirs because they had an audit that basically said they had lots of public contracts and public expenditures with no visibility, and that was like an auditor's recommendation, which is what brought it about. I want to be cognizant that as I want to move out the student policy, so I have a couple things that in addition to definitions, maybe some clarity around the what obtaining means and what it doesn't mean. And what obtaining means, like if you're servicing your existing contract, that's not lobbying, you're servicing the existing contract. Also, in the compliance with other state requirements, ORS 244, that's ethics. I think we should just say that, because I think for,
Instead of 243, I meant to say, I think the purchase says 243.
It's 279.
279.
so I just think we should just be clear, because it's like saying like, hey, this isn't the only thing, is like there's these other rules that everybody's expected to comply. I mean, we actually have another policy that deals with it, so maybe also just referencing the other policy too. So like this, so those would be my things. Anything?
Just for myself, I just need to learn a little more, and I
You know
will do
what?
that.
I'm
when
gonna
we're through with-
I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna go online and show you like how easy it is to like fill out the state form. But they have a lot of additional ongoing reporting requirements that are way more onerous, and I don't think it will have a chilling effect if it's at the right level. But I think it will have a benefit. Ian or
would we-
JJ, do you have?
would we be modeling our system around that, or in some, I guess, relation to that, to the state process, just without like the ongoing reporting requirements?
This doesn't have ongoing reporting requirements. Again,
It's a one-time registration.
well, and you can unregister. I mean, if you're not doing business. So, for example, if I were going into New York City and doing work with the, say, the Parks Department, on behalf of my business, I'd go in and register, and then, like, my project's over, or the event's over, like, you unregister, because that's the thing. And also, most places have ongoing reporting requirements, so if your work's done, you deregister, so you don't have this ongoing reporting requirement that you might be out of compliance with. Again, this is like a very light touch, but for an organization a public organization that has over $1 billion in expenditures, to me, this is like the least. I'm just gonna flag, I think maybe the informal processes, I don't know that I'd want to exempt them, because I do think having been involved in some of them, again, I think just builds credibility, like, hey, they got that contract because they're friends with somebody on the board, or they know somebody in, X department. We can give people assurance. I think that, like, we have a good process if we're just, like, we're transparent about it, and, like, the best, based on the criteria that person got the contract, or that company.
So you don't think we already have that in our process?
I would say there's a lot of transparency in our solicitation processes. I don't know what's going on as I said before, in departments and schools. If there's a vendor who's coming to departments and making their case, maybe they get on the short list for the people we go out to seek quotes from. But I don't really have visibility into that.
Okay, thank you.
Is there, so I think it'd be helpful to see a list of people that are attempting to do business with us. Is there any thought that, as a board member, you would be looking through and say, oh, I know that company, I'm gonna call this department and tell them they're my neighbor, I'd like them to be considered, kind of opposite of what we're trying to get at. I guess that would be an unintended consequence. We're all so well connected. I just wonder if, I know for me personally, it would be helpful to see who's attempting to do business with the district.
Well, I think what's more likely to happen is somebody to call and, like, hey, I'm interested in doing that, do you have anything to do with it, or whose department is this in? The informal pieces.
I guess my question is, board members could also meddle in a way that might not be helpful.
I haven't seen that happen.
Okay.
In my role.
Okay.
But I
again,
think that
because
if
you're not the person making the decision, though.
True, but I think if I heard of a situation where a board member was trying to influence the outcome of a competitive process, I would caution that is sort of not appropriate and not in line with the goals of public procurement law, and all the processes we do, so that we don't inject sort of bias and pressure into our decision making.
I understand that. I think it's really important to follow the rules there. I know that I've been contacted, it's been a very long time, by somebody that was trying to influence a vendor selection. And I just know about that for me. I don't know how often that happens, so I was curious about that.
Well, I actually think it happens more often than not. And board members sometimes just in the meetings just say, like, I think we should be doing X, or maybe you're not naming the vendor, but you're saying, like, the service that you want. Which is why having it be public just puts it all out there. And then, but I really want to make sure that we get to the student rep. So I think we have some other pieces. Yep. Do you have any questions before we move on?
No.
Okay. I'm going to now turn the meeting over to JJ, who asks that we consider some changes to the student rep policy. And unless there is a major question, I would like to move it out of committee today to get it moving through the process.
Just to clarify, is it okay if we kind of just go over the changes, or do you just want us to completely just?
Well, there's
leave it?
just two changes, right, after we've eliminated that one. So why don't you just explain what the two changes are and why you and the district student council would like to change them?
Yeah, well, I'll just provide some clarity, then I'll introduce my staff liaison, Yan Seychao. So the District Student Council, for the past couple of years, we've been having lots of discussion around some of these changes, and I think especially as we're working to develop our bylaws, we've noticed there's some collusion with some of these board policies. So I'll now introduce my staff liaison, Yan, to provide some clarity.
Hi everyone, my name is Yen Sei Chow, she, her, and her student engagement specialist. I hope that you all can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So ultimately, we wanted to make at least a couple of short-term changes, one of which is that we had previously had student reps at each school. One would be the main representative, and then there would be an alternate. We had decided that we'd like to move it to 2 reps at each school, as it feels a little bit better being able to also share the leadership opportunity. We are also wanting to take out the language around the alternate representative being the student body president. So that would mean then in each school's their process of electing their DSC reps, they would then elect 2. And then the last one is actually just changing the requirement of 90% of meetings in order for students to receive the 1 elective credit. We are changing it to 80% of meetings. Those are the changes.
Yeah, is there any
Changing
question?
from 80 to 9, I'm sorry. I just
90
saw
to 80.
from 90 to 80. Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
I also ask whether, in advance of putting this on the agenda, whether the high school senior staff had any issues with it, and the answer was they did not have an issue with changing it. Just everybody's. Does anybody have any questions for?
No, but I really
JJ
like
or
that there's
Yen?
this continuous improvement process. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I just think it's really nice to have 2. I'm sure you would have liked somebody else too. And 80% seems fine. I can see lots of times when maybe you couldn't make it, so.
And just quickly to clarify here with this, like going from 2 representatives and then from like an alternate and a main, that's pretty much how we've been operating, in the DSC for a while. And when we were looking over our bylaws, and we're like, why is it like this? Like these titles mean pretty much nothing already, except for some weird stuff around voting, which we don't really do. So this is pretty much, this is pretty much just aligning the policy with what already occurs in District Student Council.
Great, I think it's great.
So I'm good with whatever changes, like this is an exercise in self-governance. Can we move to the full board for a first reading with a recommendation from the?
Yes.
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 Okay, great. Thank you for bringing that forward. And I'm wondering, Director DePass, whether just knowing that JJ's time is wrapping up, whether we could get a first reading on next Tuesday's work session as part of the consent agenda or after the consent agenda, just so we can get the 21 days going so that maybe JJ can see this through.
Sure. Anything for students? And I'll confirm with Chair Wong.
And just for anyone who's watching, it's actually Monday next week because of
Okay,
the
yeah,
election.
sorry.
Yeah, just
That's right.
if
Then
people wanna
it's the
tune in for it.
19th.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. It's more just a courtesy, is like, get that through. All right, we're adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.